Tripp Jennings. I met many of you as you were coming in. I'm the executive director of New Mexico In Depth. We're an 11-year-old nonprofit media outlet that does, as our name suggests, in-depth journalism. We do investigative journalism. I work with Bryant Furlow. Bryant Furlow is here with me to talk about a story we did in December about school discipline. And school discipline specifically in Gallup McKinley school districts. A couple of housekeeping duties. I want to make sure that you guys, everybody knows that there are going to be photographers roaming around taking pictures. If you have a name card with a red, they know not to take a photo of your face, but there will be some photos of behind your head, from group shots and stuff like that. Second, I want to check again to make sure that no one needs any interpretation equipment. We have Joanna Mini Goats over here who can help if you need it. With those two items, basically, I've mentioned those two items. I'm going to get into our presentation now. And as I said, we came out here today and are thrilled with the terrific turnout. It's just amazing. If we're going to go ahead and start, if I may, just start talking. Bryant and I are going to have a conversation about a school story about the Gallup McKinley School District that we published in December. So, Bryant, we reported in December that Native students are punished more harshly than other students in New Mexico. Why look at school discipline in the first place? Why is that such an important matter?
Thank you, Tripp. And thank all of you for being here. Can people hear me? No? Let's try this button again.
So a little closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, is that any better?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. I wanted to start by thanking all of you for being here today, and to thank Anna and Chris and Connie at the Alliance for co-sponsoring this with us. Our partners from ProPublica are not able to join us physically, but they put a lot of work into helping organize this meeting as well. Am I talking too low?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll learn.
Just a little closer to the mic.
Got it.
There you go.
I also want to express the gratitude I feel for the community. We spent a lot of last year traveling McKinley County and the school district, talking to people at chapter houses, knocking on people's doors. The generosity was remarkable. And we want to thank the experts that helped us understand what we were hearing from the community, including UNM Professor Wendy Gray-Ice, who has joined us today. Thank you for being here. And I also want to mention that the Attorney General, Raul Torres, has sent Special Counsel Adolfo Mendez to observe this part of the meeting as well. He's in the back. To answer your question, we wanted to take a look at student discipline across New Mexico, because in recent years it's been pretty well reported that in large cities there are racial disparities in which kids get punished the most harshly. But there wasn't a lot of journalistic coverage of what that looked like in New Mexico. It matters because studies have shown, scientists have found, that the more often a child is removed from a classroom, the more often they receive detention that takes them out of the class, or they're suspended or expelled from school, the more likely that child is to struggle academically with learning, the more likely they are to not complete their high school graduation requirements and to drop out. And there's even research showing that they are more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. And Professor Gray-Ice's mom, Dr. Dolores Gray-Ice, who works for the Navajo Nation, did dissertation research that touched on that part, where she interviewed men who were incarcerated in Arizona, Navajo men, and found that those men, their first encounter with law enforcement, their first bad encounter, negative experience, experience with law enforcement was in school. So the way that schools handle school discipline, the way that schools punish misbehavior or deal with disruptive behavior can have really profound effects on the rest of a kid's life. That's why we looked at this question.
You know, and part of the context too is that right now there is a national movement away from zero tolerance policies. And so that kind of is part of the context in which we were asking those questions, right?
Yeah.
So you started more than a year ago with a set of data on student discipline from across the state. So how did we wind up focusing on Gallup McKinley? I think there are 89 school districts, I think, in the state, and how did we come to focus on one?
Thank you. Yeah, we didn't know at the beginning that we would be coming out to Gallup McKinley. At the beginning, because the state of New Mexico does not publish student discipline information on the internet, we weren't sure what we would find. But we went to the public education department in Santa Fe, and we told them we wanted to see a decade's worth of student infraction reports for the past decade. These are reports that every year each public school district gives a report to PED in Santa Fe for each time they have an infraction with a student that merits a suspension, an expulsion, or calling the police on a student. So we got all that information for the entire state, and it was only after we started looking at that data that two things became very strongly apparent from the data. One is that indigenous children in New Mexico are punished much more harshly and more frequently than other children, other groups of children in New Mexico. And that's not only true here in Gallup McKinley, that's true across the state. But it's true statewide in large part because of what's happening here in Gallup McKinley schools. We found that, and for one thing, Gallup McKinley enrolls more Native students than any other public school district in the U.S. About 1 in 4 Native students here in New Mexico attends a Gallup McKinley school, but about 3 in every 4 Native kids who's expelled from school is a student out here at Gallup McKinley. So you have a school that enrolls 1 in 4 Native students in New Mexico, responsible for 3 in 4 of the expulsions of Native students in New Mexico overall. So those were the two things that really jumped out. Now, I hope everyone has a handout. Let me know if you don't. Can we? Thank you. They're on the. We'll make sure everyone has a handout, but the handouts have 2 graphs. And the graph on the right side shows you what I was just describing, which is that statewide, there's a disparity with Native children being expelled and punished more than white classmates. But if you look at the set of bar graphs on the left side of that right-hand graph, you'll see that all students in Gallup McKinley are punished more frequently with harsh punishments like expulsion or having the police called on them for misbehavior at school. But there's still this big disparity where Native kids are twice as likely in Gallup to be either expelled or have the police called on them by the school than their white classmates. So that's what the right-hand graph shows. And after we describe our reporting, we'll have a question session in case you guys want to ask us any questions about any facet of the reporting on these graphs.
And if you look at the graph there's a QR code for those people who want to see the story. They can put their phone on the QR code and it'll go to the link of our story.
Yeah.
So, Bryant, you described, and it took months of collecting data from PED, analyzing the data. It wasn't just Bryant, it was a team from, ProPublica, analyzing data, collecting data, doing interviews. How did the school district respond to your story?
Yeah. So We reached out to the school district almost immediately once ProPublica and New Mexico and Depth agreed we were going to pursue this journalistically. So more than a year ago in February of 2022, I contacted Superintendent Mike Hyatt and some of his staff, as well as principals at some of the individual schools we were looking at, to explain what we were doing and to ask if we could have an interview with them, sit down and discuss discipline. We never got a response from the district. We followed up many times. Mr. Hyatt was copied on nearly 100 emails between us and his school district. And then a month before we published our study in December, we sent Mr. Hyatt a very detailed 10-page letter bullet pointing each of the things we were going to report in our story, every finding, the numbers. We invited him to point out anything that he thought was a mistake in our reporting, and we asked him again if he would sit down with us to discuss why we were seeing what we were seeing with Native and Navajo mainly, but also Zuni and the other Native kids being punished so harshly out here in Gallup McKinley. So overall, my perspective is that the school district was pretty secretive and wasn't too happy about us asking these questions. But then once we published, about a month after we published the story in January at a school board meeting, Hyatt told the school board that we had got the story all wrong because the school district had reported to the states as expulsions things that should have been coded instead as suspensions. And so we went back to the data that we had gotten from the state, and a data scientist at ProPublica and I, Joel Jacobs is his name, we went back through the data and we looked at the part of the discipline records that tells how long a child was removed from school, and we just looked at that. We looked at children, how many children, how often children were removed from school for 90 days or more, three months or more at a time, here in Gallup McKinley and in the rest of the state, whether you call those removals suspensions or expulsions. So we set aside Mr. Hyatt's concern about the label and just looked at how frequently kids are removed from school for a very long time. And it didn't change things at all. So it was still the case that Gallup McKinley had about 10 times the expulsion or long-term suspension removal rate as the rest of the state. And it was still the case that it was Native American children who were taking the brunt of that out here. So changing the label from expulsion to suspension did not explain away what we found. Yeah, thank you, Tripp, for reminding me. We, in the course of this reporting over the past year, we filed dozens of records requests with Gallup McKinley Schools, including some things that were utterly routine, like how many Native American students attend your schools. We asked that of other districts as well across the state. Gallup was the only school district in New Mexico that refused to tell us what their enrollment numbers were. At first they said they didn't have those numbers, and then we explained to them that they report those numbers to the state every year, and then they said they couldn't find them or disclose them to us. So we got them from the state instead, the numbers that the district had given the state, and used those for our statistical analysis of grades. But there are a number of other documents that the school district has yet to give us, including the piece of paper that Mr. Hyatt was reading from when he claimed that there were not 200 plus expulsions of kids out here, Native kids out here at McKinley, but only 15. We wanted to see that analysis. He was reading from it at the school board meeting, so we asked for a copy of it. 3 months later, they still haven't given us that piece of paper.
So, we know what the problem is, we know what the school district and how it responded. Are there other ways that a district, let's just say any district, could address behavior problems rather than exclusionary practices like expulsion or long-term suspensions? Are there other things that other districts are doing?
Right. So I should mention here that back in the 80s and 90s, it was not unusual for schools to have zero tolerance policies where if a kid makes a mistake, they're automatically suspended. That was part of, the era of tough love, and that it was also part of the war on drugs. So zero tolerance was not at all unusual until recent years, but nationally, the U.S. Department of Education has asked public school districts to move away from punitive punishment type discipline that immediately moves a child from the classroom, and to move towards some other approaches to school discipline. And now I'll explain the details, but the PED, the Public Education Department in Santa Fe, is doing a pilot study with some of these other approaches to discipline. 10 school districts across New Mexico asked to participate. Gallup McKinley was not one of them. But many of the neighboring school districts, like Cuba Independence and Central Consolidated up in Shiprock, are doing some alternatives, some different ways of handling discipline. The two sort of big approaches are, one is called socio-emotional learning, or SEL, and to oversimplify it a little bit, what that's about is building relationships between teachers and administrators with students, and involves things like teachers checking in with their students on a regular basis so they know if they're having struggles at home, or if they're facing other issues, or if they need to be assessed for a learning difficulty. So that's SEL. And the other big approach is restorative justice, which I know many of you are familiar with. And that's an approach to student discipline that seeks to talk out problems and have students recognize how their behavior has affected other students or the community at school, the classroom, and to identify ways to change how they handle whatever led to the misbehavior. So it deals with identifying the underlying issues and helping the student address those. And it encourages de-escalation and communication between students. So socio-emotional learning and restorative justice are two ways that school districts other than Gallup McKinley are trying to change how they approach student discipline issues.
So again, if the state's doing that, some districts are piloting some of those things. I mean, what else is being done across the nation? I mean, I think there's some movement at the federal level too, right? Is that correct? That they're calling on districts to rely on less of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Education has asked that schools start relying less on what's called exclusionary punishments, that get kids out of school and separate them from their learning. One of the neighboring districts here in northwestern New Mexico, Cuba Independent Schools, has ended, as of this current school year, out-of-school suspensions that separate kids from classrooms. What they're doing instead, if they feel there's a safety issue, is setting the child's home up with a hotspot so that they can have remote learning. And if they happen to live in a place where a hotspot won't work because there's a canyon wall or something, then they're busing the child to the local public library and having teachers meet with the child there. Now, Cuba's a much smaller school district than Gallup McKinley, so that's an easier lift for them than it might be for Gallup. They are trying to, some of the other school districts near here are trying to find alternatives to just suspending a kid, kicking a kid out when there's a problem.
Didn't the legislature just pass some legislation creating possibly, the governor signs it, a division within the Attorney General's office, and what would they do, possibly?
Yeah, that's right. So Attorney General Ron Torres had asked lawmakers to create a civil rights division at the state Attorney General's office that would allow his investigators to look into civil rights abuses, including those involving children and students. He's specifically interested, he told us, in looking at racial disparities in how children are punished at school. And he's also looking at ways to address bringing police into school and into classrooms too frequently. But the governor hit that bill, that Senate bill, is at 426. The lawmakers passed that bill, and if Governor Grisham signs it, it will become law, and the AG's office will be creating that civil rights division. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a quick run up on everything that we have done. We were trying to hit 20 markets and 20 minutes, and that was 20 minutes right there. So we're very proud of ourselves. Now we're moving to questions and answers from you guys, and we're going to have somebody with a mic who will have a mic and basically come around. If you have questions for, yes, specific to the article. This is to us and about the reporting, not the following conversation that will happen after our presentation. Specific to what we found in the article in December.
So if you have any questions for us about the reporting, now's the time to ask those. And then once Chris and the Alliance take over after the break, they're also going to have a question and answer discussion period to express concerns and to share experiences.
I'm Genevieve Jackson. I've been a school administrator all my life and a teacher. You mentioned that you presented to the school board. I'm very interested in knowing how the school board members reacted. I think there's a couple of Native Americans on that board. What was the reaction, or what questions did they ask? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We did reach out to the school board members individually, repeatedly, not just the school district employees like Mr. Hyatt, the superintendent. We did not find any of the school board members who were willing to interview with us or answer our questions. We did CC Mr. Mortensen, the president of the school board, on that letter I mentioned describing to Mr. Hyatt our findings. We never heard back from any of them. When Mr. Hyatt, at the January 9th school board meeting, responded to our reporting and told the school board that it was incorrect, none of them asked any questions of him at that point either. We followed up with each of them after that school board meeting to say, well, now, would you like to talk to us? We'd be happy to answer your questions, and we would like to ask you some questions, but we were not successful in making contact with them. She's going to read. And I'm sorry, yes, 3 of the school board members, 3 of the 5 are Navajo members.
My name is Miriam DeGay. I come from Navajo, New Mexico. And I'm just wondering if you did statistics on the urban schools versus the reservation schools, and what was it like between out there and over here? That's my question, you know, and I would like to know how our schools were on the reservation. I'm very curious about it. And I'm a retired school teacher. I'm a retired Navajo Nation government official, elected. I've held several Navajo Nation jobs, and I was nominated by the last council as being an outstanding Navajo woman, because I've been dealing with politics a long time. And I've taught everything from kindergarten to 9th grade, all up, and also taught Sunday school, Bible school, GED, so I think I really know education all the way up. So thank you, and thank you for your study. I too, like Genevieve, am curious, you know, about Gallup McKinley County. We know there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed, and I'm hoping that we will have progressive people to change it and make it better for our children. I want our children to be successful. Some of mine have, and some of them didn't make it, and it bothers me. And the Navajo Nation itself, they need to address all the schools within their jurisdiction. You know, that's what I would like to see. They can't just look the other way anymore. You know, I'm a product of boarding school, and people always trash boarding school, but I always say to myself, evidently they did a good job with me. So I appreciate, I didn't lose my language, I didn't lose my culture. I'm glad I'm very bilingual, you know, and Navajo is a very tough thing to learn, to write it, to read it, and all of that. It's very tough. I think it's the toughest language in the world. So I want to thank you for your reports, and please answer my questions about the schools where they're located.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service.
They couldn't decode it.
So to answer your question, first of all, I did visit and speak to people in Navajo and other communities throughout the county, and heard the same kind of concerns from parents and grandparents in Navajo that I heard in Gallup and Crown Point, Peru. Statistically, it was challenging to look at some of the smaller communities because like Navajo Middle School only has 100 odd students. And when you have small numbers, it can be a little bit tricky to compare between individual schools because of those small numbers. Statistical tools that we use are designed to use larger numbers. So we ended up looking mainly at Gallup McKinley as a whole, the entire district, and comparing to the rest of the state, so all of the other school districts, and comparing them to what we saw in Gallup McKinley as a whole. That said, we did see that the disparity between Native American students and white students was not present only in Navajo Nation schools, it was also present here. And we've had some people point out that even there were some headlines in April last year about the Gallup High School senior prank, and those students were initially kicked out of school, and the school filed a police report on them. The vast majority of those high school students were Native. So I know that Mr. Hyatt has said a few times that the reason that Natives are punished more harshly in the school district is because there are economic and other issues among kids who live in rural areas, and those areas tend to be mostly Navajo, but that's not what we saw in the data. We think that the data shows that there is something different about how this school district handles school discipline with its Native versus its white kids compared to other districts in this part of the state. Did I answer your question?
Somewhat. I would like more specific answers.
Do you want specific answers in terms of individual schools like Crown Point? And we didn't do a statistical analysis for each individual school, but we do have that information. And if you left your contact information, I'd be happy to follow up with you and see if I can answer your questions more specifically. And I could also arrange for us to ask for a sit-down meeting with ProPublica's data guy as well, so we could both answer your questions.
Have you had any response from the Navajo Nation in Window Rock about all of this?
So you were asking if the Navajo Nation has commented. We have not yet heard one, but we do understand that they're looking into this.